Well, I did miss the elimination matches this year. I know we got WarGames, which was great, and I would not be opposed to them doing it yearly. But let's talk about that real quick. Triple H did mention the press conference I was at right after the show, in answering someone's question that it's up. He has no idea. Shit changes from day to day. But he did comment on the possibility of, he doesn't know if he'll do it every year, and you can't challenge someone to a 5-man Money in the Bank match. And he kind of went off on pay-per-view, gimmick pay-per-views and shit, kind of making the case for why those pay-per-views need to happen. And to which I say his answer was completely fucking dumb as far as that goes. Of course you're not going to challenge someone to a Money in the Bank ladder match. It's more of a question of whether you do it at WrestleMania or have its own pay-per-view. It's not a case of like, well, it needs to have its own pay-per-view because you can't challenge someone to it. Well, no shit. Elimination Chamber, honestly, like I've said before, get rid of the fucking show. I think it's silly it has its own show. At least where it is on the pay-per-view. On the pay-per-view calendar, because they do it before Mania every year. They're doing it before Mania again next year. They'll be in Montreal. That's great and all, but it's like nothing ever. Do you think Roman Reigns will lose the championship inside the Chamber before Mania? The answer is no. And especially now that we only have one world champion, it's not like, oh, you can use one of them. You can use the Chamber to crown a number one contender. That's what the Rumble is for the month before. So I still very much hate the Chamber concept being where it is on the calendar. And doing what they did back in the day, I feel like is much smarter 20 years ago when they had it at Survivor Series one year, and then SummerSlam one year, and then New Year's Revolution. Like, I would much prefer that. Are you kind of, I don't know, I like the War Games matches, but are you of the same mindset that you would rather see them be brought back when it actually matters, when you have two teams that can go at it?
Yeah, definitely. His question, I'm glad he answered the question. He didn't put like a Tony Khan. It was like, I don't want to answer that question. But like, his answer was kind of dumb, like you said. He was like, well, it's not like you can challenge anyone for it. Well, like, no shit. I mean, you can't, why would any champion challenge someone in a fucking 6-man Elimination Chamber match when he could just face one person? Or like you said, you can't challenge anyone to Money in the Bank. Like, that's just not a thing. So, I didn't love the answer, but at least we got an answer, I guess. So, but no, I think just like Elimination Chamber, I think it's tough because I think Money in the Bank, I like it as a pay-per-view more than the other ones just because I think
agree.
It's like right before it splits WrestleMania and SummerSlam. It's kind of like a perfect little area, but I mean, people have been calling for King of the Ring to be in that time, which I don't hate. Elimination Chamber, similar to Hell in a Cell, like, it should make sense. Like, it's not like you need Elimination Chamber every year. Like, you can honestly spread that over a couple of years. And, like, if there's one champion, there's a good amount of challengers. Yeah, put in Elimination Chamber. That makes sense. Same with Hell in a Cell. Like, that's supposed to be, like, the end-all, be-all blow-off match. It shouldn't just be like, oh, October again, here comes Hell in a Cell, because that's what it's been like, and it just hasn't mean anything. With War Games, I think it should be something similar. Like, it shouldn't just be, Survivor Series time. It's just cram 6 people together. Like, this year, I think with the men, it worked. Like, I think it was like the Bloodline versus them. I think it had a good story there, but I think it doesn't need it. I'd rather, like, you do it at, like, a different pay-per-view if it means something, not just because it's that time of month again we do it. So, just like Elimination Chamber, just like Hell in a Cell, Money in the Bank, I'm fine with it being its own thing. I mean, if they put it at WrestleMania, I wouldn't hate it, but if you can do a special to pay-per-view, I would do Money in the Bank between WrestleMania and SummerSlam, and then War Games, I would put in the same hat as, like, Elimination Chamber and Hell in a Cell. Like, if it's necessary, then do it. Not just do its own pay-per-view just to sell tickets.
Yeah, no, I think it was a nice way to make, Survivor Series mean something this year. I wouldn't necessarily do it every year. Again, I wouldn't hate it because the matches usually deliver as they did in NXT. But that's the other thing, too. I feel like, and I completely understand why they did this. And I thought this year it worked. Both matches I thought were very good. The men's I thought was slightly stronger, but we'll get into it. They kind of need to have one for the men and have one for the women. Now we have a men's and women's Rumble every year. And you can argue that's overkill, which it absolutely is. But, listen, everyone loves a Rumble, so it's whatever. The men's and women's Money to Make ladder matches, they're 2 ladder matches on the same show. We've seen ladder matches on the same shows for decades now, and more than one, whatever. I'm fine with that. I would improve that by doing it on one night and one on the other if it was back at Mania, but that's just me. And even the Elimination Chamber matches, I don't know if they did one for the men and one for the women this year. I think they did, actually. They did one for the Raw women this year, and they did one for the men for the WWE title, I think, that Brock won, which was stupid. But, typically we get a women's, we get a men's. which I'm all for fairness, but I think they should only do it if it actually means something. Like, for example, the Bloodline match this year meant something. The women's one also meant something because they were feuding with Damage Control was Bianca, even though they've beaten them at every turn, which, again, we'll get into. That's not going to be the case every year. You're not going to have a women's faction in there every year. You're not going to have a men's faction in there every year. So, again, I just go back. Like, I know NXT did it every year, the same event every year, and it worked. But that's because they had an Undisputed Era in there every single year. And they didn't have a women's one up until a few years ago. And the women's one was usually pretty good. The men's one was usually pretty good as well. But like even last year, if there was one in NXT this year, after the whole NXT 1.0 versus NXT 2.0, it wouldn't have mattered. Like no one would have given a shit because there really wasn't a reason to do it, to do a men's or a women's this year. There was really no reason to do it, so they did it on the main roster instead. But yeah, like I go back to what we had originally. They had WarGames started in the NWA/WCW. Correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Marceau, and I could be very wrong here. I don't think they did it on the same show every year back in WCW. I don't think they always did it at World War III or Fall Brawl or this. I think they switched it up at whatever show they wanted to. They did a lot of fucking WarGames matches, but I think they did it at different times of the year for when it actually was necessary. So I would argue doing the same thing in WWE. But again, at least for this show, it worked.